There's a point every raised bed build reaches, usually right after the corners are square and the soil goes in, where it's technically finished. Most people stop exactly there. Function achieved, box built, done, whether it's headed for vegetables or flowers. But go through the 10 builds in this video and you'll notice not one of them actually stopped at that point. Somebody kept going past good enough for no reason except that they wanted to. A corner that got heated and bent instead of left square. A fence built to borrow off what was already standing instead of adding a new structure. A finish picked for what it protects, rather than how fast it dries. The wood never changes. What changes is how long somebody kept working after everyone else would have called it done. And that's exactly what separates a raised bed from a raised flower bed people actually stop to look at. 10. The layered foundation build. Most people fill a raised bed with soil and call it done. This one starts with maple logs at the bottom, then smaller logs, then bark chunks, and only then soil and compost on top. A buried, slow decomposing core that keeps feeding the bed for years instead of needing amendment every season. The tensioning wire got pulleys added mid-build, which tells you something. This wasn't a project finished once and left alone. It was tuned. Flagstone underfoot and string lights overhead are the part people notice first, but they're the last 5%. The bed itself is doing the actual work. 9. The shelved bed with integrated watering. The corner joinery here uses a stacked interlocking method instead of driving nails straight through the boards, the kind of choice that only matters years later, when the wood hasn't split at the seams. The drip line originally looped loose across the surface. It got pulled tight and rerouted around the edge because a raised bed's irrigation should disappear into the structure, not sit on top of it announcing itself. The real accident here is the finish. Boiled linseed oil wasn't picked to add contrast. It was picked to protect the wood, and it happened to pull the grain's natural light and dark pattern out of hiding. Sometimes the best design decision is the one made for a different reason entirely. 8. The tiered slope and the client finish. A sloped front yard usually gets written off as unusable, or worse, regraded flat. This build did neither. It stepped the bed down the grade in tiers, using the slope as a structural excuse for elevation change, instead of fighting it into submission. Integrated risers keep the irrigation lines out of sight, and the debate worth knowing about is the posts. Concrete set feels permanent, but a gravel backfill drains better and lets the wood dry out between rains, which is the difference between a bed that lasts 8 years and one that rots from the base up. Pair that with a client build finished in straight mineral oil instead of a sealant, a deliberate trade of some longevity for a build that's safe to plant food and flowers directly against. Both of these read as intentional from the street, which is the actual test for anything built in a front yard. 7. The Mower-Width Garden. The detail that matters here isn't the metal sheeting or the treated lumber, it's the path. It was sized to the widest part of a wheelbarrow on purpose, so the whole layout stays serviceable at scale instead of becoming something you have to climb into. That's the difference between a bed you tend and a bed you eventually resent. There's already a strawberry tower plan for the center next season, a raised bed that's still being designed after it's built, with room saved for what comes next is doing something most finished projects don't, staying unfinished on purpose. 6. The precision box and its borrowed fence. Look closely at the joinery on this one. Mitered corners reinforced with splines, shiplap rebated sideboards so soil can't wash out between the seams, pocket holes instead of exposed screws, edges rounded on a router table. That's furniture-level thinking applied to something most people build out of whatever's left over from another project. And instead of building a standalone cage to keep animals out, the fence gets welded onto logic already sitting in the yard, attached straight to the existing perimeter fence rather than competing with it as its own structure. That's the actual insight worth taking. Protection doesn't need its own visual footprint if you're willing to lean on what's already standing. The bed earns its craftsmanship. The fence earns its near invisibility. Together, they're the same idea twice. Do less, but do it exactly right. Number 5. The budget cedar bed and the U-shaped layout. One of these cost under $200 in materials. The other measures over 12 feet across and required rethinking the entire layout mid-build. Neither compromise came from money. They came from figuring out what problem each yard actually had. The cedar bed proves a tight budget still buys you real joinery and real wood if you're willing to skip the frills. The U-shaped build solves something different: reach. Every wall sits close enough to work from the inside without stepping over anything, and the hinged mesh panels do double duty as both a barrier against dogs and kids and a trellis for climbing peas. Budget and layout are two separate problems. Solving one well doesn't require solving the other expensively. 4. The Terraced Hillside Garden. This is landscape architecture wearing a garden's clothes. Built into a south-facing slope entirely by hand, the retaining wall uses reclaimed stone pulled from old walls already on the property, stacked so no two vertical seams line up on top of each other, the same principle that's kept dry stone walls standing for centuries. Underneath, posts go over 30 inches into the ground, well past the frost line, so nothing heaves loose after the first hard winter. And the fencing is layered on purpose, fine hardware cloth low to stop the small diggers, wider mesh higher for everything that jumps. A slope like this usually gets treated as the problem. Here, it's the entire reason the design looks this deliberate. 3. The full outdoor room. The raised bed in this one isn't the feature. It's one piece of a larger decision to treat a dead, flat corner of the yard as a full program instead of a single fix. Growing space, a sitting area with a fire pit, and shed storage, all built as one connected project rather than 3 separate someday projects. That sequencing is the actual lesson. A raised bed installed alone tends to sit there looking like an accessory. A raised bed installed as part of a bigger plan reads as infrastructure for how you'll actually use the space. 2. The angled bed against the wall. This build had every reason to be a simple rectangle and refused to be one. A non-square angle from the existing retaining wall, posts that needed to sit inside the box instead of outside it, a height that tapers down one side. Any one of those would justify defaulting to something easier. Instead, the whole thing got reworked around solid cedar 4x4s instead of the original 2x6 and post plan, specifically because the design called for angles that didn't line up with standard corner framing. The lesson isn't the wood choice, it's that the constraints came first and the design got built to answer them, not around them. Lastly, 1. The rounded herb and flower bed. Every raised bed on this list is a rectangle except this one, and the reason is worth sitting with. Getting a corner to curve like that means clean cuts, then dozens of shallow relief cuts along the bend until softening the wood with heat until it finally gives, which is the only reason a straight cedar board agrees to hold a curve instead of splitting. Nobody strictly needs a rounded raised bed. Herbs and flowers grow just as well inside 90-degree angles, but that's exactly the point this whole video has been building toward. A raised bed only ever looks designed the moment somebody does more work than the plants required for no reason except that they wanted to look at it every day and like what they saw. One more thing before you go. SimHome runs lists you won't find anywhere else. The backyard decor one shows 10 setups people actually built in real yards, not staged ones. There's 10 small kitchen storage ideas that squeeze space out of nowhere, which is exactly what it sounds like. And small bedroom ideas, 10 ways to actually make them work, does what most bedroom content doesn't. It tells you what actually works instead of what photographs well. Every one of these gets the same treatment this video did. Real research, real sources, nothing pulled out of thin air. If you've got a few minutes, the link in the description takes you there. That's the video. If something in here actually helped, a like goes a long way. And if you know someone staring down a tight space of their own, send this their way. Drop a comment if you've got a setup like one of these, or if you tried something nobody's covered yet. See you in the next one.